Okay, everyone. Thanks for being here this afternoon. This is the last session of this conference, OR66. Before moving to our last plenary talk, I would like to introduce the President-elect of Euro, the Association of European Operational Research Society, Professor Fritz Spieksma. Professor Spieksma is a professor and chair of combinatorial optimization in Edinburgh University of Technology. He has previously worked in University of Columbia, University of British Columbia, Maastricht University, and also Catholic University of Leuven. He has done a lot of work in scheduling, routing, and clustering problems. He's also founder of a Euro special group, working group in OR in sports. He's also associate editor and member of editorial board of several known journals, OR journals, including for OR and Operation Research Letters and Informs Transactions on Education. Please join me welcoming him to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you for this extensive introduction. Yes, my name is Fritz Spieksma. I'm President-elect of Euro. What is Euro? Euro is the association of 31 national European OR societies. And next year, the Euro conference is coming home, if you forgive me using this sports metaphor. It's coming to Leeds, and we would very much love to see you there and welcome you there to convey some of this conference's spirit and atmosphere to Leeds. And it promises to be a special year. It is actually the 50th anniversary year of Euro. Now, I do realize completely in this setting that 50 doesn't impress you much, I would imagine. That makes us just the younger, irresponsible sister of the OR Society. I accept that. However, birthdays are there to celebrate, and we expect to make this a very special edition of the Euro Conference and celebrate, and I hope that you'll be joining us in celebrating. And actually, there is a specific day, January 27, which we regard as the birthday of Euro. And if you happen to use social media accounts, and if you happen to be, say, awake on January 27, we would love to receive your congratulations. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. And now, last plenary speaker, Professor Michel Gendreau. If I want to introduce him in one sentence, I would say it's very unlikely that you can find anybody who has worked in stochastic vehicle routing and has not read or cited his work. He is the second top mathematician in Canada and the 9th most cited person in operational research according to Google Scholar. He is a professor of operational research in Department of Mathematics and Industrial Engineering at Polytechnic Montreal, Canada. And I'm really thankful and appreciated that you travel all the way from Montreal, Canada to Bangor. And he has done a lot of work in logistics system, energy production, healthcare, and telecommunication. He's also co-edited 8 books. He's a recipient of the prestigious Robert Herman Lifetime Achievement Award and also fellow of both Informs and IFORS. And today, Professor Gendreau will be presenting on stochastic vehicle routing, an overview. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage. Thank you.
thank you, Mossab, for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here in Bangor. I have to say this is my first time ever in Wales, and I guess it's my first time in a meeting of the OR Society, unless we try to pretend that the I-Force 2002 in Edinburgh was a meeting of the OR Society. So, yes, topic of the day, stochastic vehicle routing, an overview. In the abstract, I said that this overview would be based on a chapter of a book which is yet to appear. In fact, this is false publicity. The talk of today is a mixture of stuff that comes from this chapter, which I like a lot, but which is now under revision, and of lots of material that I have assembled over the years. So,
If you can go a bit more that way so the camera's easier.
yeah, okay. So, all of this would not be possible without contributions from lots of people. First and foremost, I would like to thank my colleague Gilbert Laporte, who introduced me really to stochastic vehicle routing more than 30 years ago. Basically, this happened as he asked me if I was willing to co-supervise a PhD student with him, who was a brilliant guy whose name is not there because I tried to put the names of the people who made contribution to the talk of today. I want also to talk very much my dear colleagues Ola Jabali from Politecnico di Milano and Walter Ray from Montreal, who have been involved in many projects in stochastic vehicle routing. Then former PhD student Majid Salavati Goshkal, my colleague from Montreal, Jean-Yves Potvin, who's been involved in lots of other things. Students from Polytechnique, Charles Gauvin was a master's student, we're going to talk about him, and Lucas Parada is currently finishing a PhD. Other colleagues from Polytechnique, Fausto Erico, who was at some point a postdoc working on a very interesting project, Jean-François Côté, another former PhD student, Alexandre Florio, whom we tried to attract in Montreal and got lured away by the daughters of Amazon. Such is life. Then, special mention to Pedro Munari and Reynaldo Morabito, who are the co-authors of this upcoming chapter on vehicle routing, on stochastic vehicle routing. In fact, two chapters, one of them on stochastic vehicle routing and one of them on robust vehicle routing. So we're really looking forward to completing those chapters and seeing the book edited. So, without further delay, well, we have a long list of topics to cover. And I have to be completely honest with you, the slide set for this talk is way too large. So what I'm going to do, well, the nice thing when you have more material, at least you can decide to skip things. If you don't have enough material, after 25 minutes, what do? You know, you can maybe tap dance or do things like that, but it's a bit uncomfortable. So being a stochastic optimizer, it's easy. I know what is the optimal solution. The optimal solution is have more stuff and skip some of the stuff as you're going around. So this is exactly what I'll be doing today. I want to emphasize the fact that I don't know if we can do this through the OR Society. I am very open to distributing those slides to anybody who's interested and having a copy. So we have a number of topics, and let's get started with short introduction. And obviously this just goes back to what are vehicle routing problems. Obviously, I would expect most of you to know about vehicle routing problems, and even to know maybe that these were introduced by Dancing and Ramser in a paper that was published back in 1959, which did not even talk about vehicle routing. It talked about the vehicle dispatching problem. This is one of the most studied area in transportation and logistics. When I was editor-in-chief of Transportation Science in the early 2010s, I think that about 40% of all the submissions that we were receiving had to do with vehicle routing problems. So for those who don't know what this is all about, it's just basic problems where I'm going to look at the delivery version of this. We just assume that we're delivering products to some customers with a fleet of vehicles that have limited capacity, and we're trying to do this as effectively as possible. That is, we try to determine a set of minimum cost, minimum distance, minimum time routes. It all depends exactly on what you want to take as objective, while satisfying customer demands. And there has been an astronomical number of variants of these problems defined over the years. The most important involved the introduction of travel and service times with duration or time window constraints. You can have multiple depots, you can have multiple types of vehicles, and so on and so on. But in this context, what is stochastic vehicle routing? In a nutshell, it's very easy. It's a vehicle routing problem in which something is uncertain. So this can be, for example, demands. This could be travel or service times. Could be all kinds of things. There's even a variant that we worked on, which was vehicle routing with loading constraints and uncertain dimensions of objects. You're going to say this is nonsensical. This is a problem that was invented by crazy university professors who are just looking for ways to thicken their CV. Well, not at all. Not at all. It turns out that this problem comes up from a real practical application. In fact, the student at the time, Jean-François Côté, had been working for a company who was developing routing solutions for different type of delivery companies. And one of those was kind of very unusual in the sense that they were loading constraints on the vehicle, but the dimensions, the actual dimensions of the objects were not known. And you may think that this is completely ludicrous. No, it's not ludicrous. Companies have in their warehouses objects that they are selling. They know what are the nominal dimensions of the products they're selling. Okay, this is the fridge, it's that thick, that wide, blah, blah, that high. But when you look at the way it is packaged and the space it actually takes on the vehicle, well, sometimes they know and sometimes they don't know. So there is indeed an incredible range of possible options for stochastic vehicle routing. So let me just mention to you some of what I see as the main classes of stochastic VRPs. First and foremost, problems with stochastic demands. So this is kind of a very easy dimension to see as being stochastic. But something which is important here is the beginning, is that we suppose that we have a probability distribution that describes the demand of each customer. So the demand is uncertain, but it's not fuzzy. It's given through a probability distribution, and usually people will assume that the demands are independent, and in my opinion, this is one of the most easy to criticize assumptions in this problem. Because depending on what you are delivering, it may make sense or not make sense. And my favorite example for this is beer delivery. Suppose you have a company that is delivering on a regular basis beer to a number of outlets. Well, you can assume that the consumption of beer over, let's say, a week depends on lots of things. And things like major sporting events, heat waves, all kinds of things like that, which means that if you have a high demand in one outlet, you probably have a high demand in other outlets. So those things are probably correlated. And when you're making independent assumptions, you are being optimistic. Something which is a bit strange, this idea of VRP with stochastic customers. I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to show you an example at the end of the talk of this problem, but this is an extension of VRP with stochastic demands, where you can imagine that in some cases the demand of a customer is just zero. So you don't have to visit the customer. Then VRP with stochastic travel times, well, this is easy to think about when we're living in congested city environments, that travel times between different customers are not deterministic. They can vary quite a lot depending on traffic conditions. You can also have a version of this which has to do with service times. And when you're thinking about, for example, suppose that your vehicle is not really a vehicle, but is a repairman, a technician making interventions on, for example, failed equipment. We did a project many years ago about technicians working for Xerox in Santiago, in Chile. And basically what happens in those situations is the company receives a phone call for a service request, but nobody has a clear idea of what is to be repaired, how much time this will take, and if this could be something really long or something short. So those problems with traveling technicians are clearly very stochastic in most applications. Okay, one thing that I would like to emphasize, and this is something that is rarely mentioned in the vehicle routing community and the vehicle routing literature, the fact that what is called VRP is not one problem. And I'm not even talking about the variance. Let's just talk about capacitated VRP with deterministic demands. So you may think of this as, well, it's all the same problem. Yeah, when you write those problems in a mathematical fashion, it's all the same problem, but it refers to a wide range of real life situation. I might be doing some kind of tactical planning for some company that is planning regular deliveries to regular customers, outlets, and things like that. But I might also be looking at things that are completely one-shot. Maybe I'm just trying to plan deliveries of a store selling furniture and I'm planning last mile delivery of this furniture to customers. But those customers, they're not regular customers. The customers that I have today will not come back before 10 or 15 or 20 years. You don't change your kitchen range every day. So this is super different from delivering beer or soft drink to convenience outlets. Those are miles apart. And this, as I said, the mathematical structure is exactly the same. If you write the equations for those two problems, they are the same, but they describe a very different reality. And when you're looking at uncertainty issues, this is important because uncertainty will take place in a very different fashion when you're looking at one of those tactical long-range problem to a problem where you're just planning tomorrow's deliveries. And just to give you an example of what type of strange stochastic problem you can run into. Many years ago, we had a PhD student who was working on, not delivery, but collection of milk in dairy farms over a huge territory and collecting huge quantities of milk with specialized trucks and things like that. The condition about the pickup routes is that they're made for a 6-month period. So it's 6-month period, and over 6 months, the productivity of cows varies tremendously. It varies tremendously in a known fashion, in the sense that you know that in January cows are not very productive, but then in May they are producing milk like crazy. But being stuck having to make routes for one set of routes that would cover all those periods. So it's kind of something to keep in mind. Now, I would just like, for those of you who are maybe not so much aware with stochastic optimization and dealing with uncertainty, just like to do a very short recall of this. So one thing that a lot of people are not really aware of is the fact that, in fact, very early in the development of operations research, and some of the key players realized that there were really big issues with uncertain parameters, and that, in fact, this uncertainty should be dealt with in explicit fashion. And this led quite rapidly to the development of a variety of approaches. Stochastic programming with recourse, and you see the date, 1955. Dynamic programming, well, depending where you take your sources, it can be 1957, 1958. Chance-constrained programming, and then later robust optimization. So we have all those methods that are there. And one thing which is important about all those stochastic optimization approaches is that a key issue is what is the connection between the revelation of information. When do we get to learn the true values of the stochastic parameters and the optimization, the decision-making itself? So when the values become known, and also what can I do when I'm told about those values. This is something which is extremely important. Oops. So, stochastic programming with recurse is one of the first techniques that was developed for this. It was developed by George Danzig and by Martin Beale. Martin Beale, who was from UK. And basically, this is something which they thought about separately, but the key idea is exactly the same in both cases, is that the problem needs to be divided into stages. And those stages correspond to the decisions that you have to make and when the information is revealed. And the simplest case is two-stage stochastic programming. So basically, this can be divided into, we have a planning stage, and then we get to learn about the uncertain parameters, and we are allowed then to put in action recourse actions. And if you want to learn more about this, I can only send you to this excellent book by John Burge and François Louveau, which is the book that I do use in my stochastic optimization class every year. Then there is dynamic programming. A lot of people know about dynamic programming because first there's deterministic dynamic programming, but also there's stochastic dynamic programming. This was developed by Richard Bellman to deal with sequential decision problems. And the key principle is what we call decomposition according to stages and the so-called principle of optimality. Now, this is excellent approach if the number of possible actions and stages and states is limited. And again, I send you back to this excellent reference by Dimitri Bertsekas. Then, Chance constraint programming, which was proposed by Churns and Cooper, which is basically the key idea here is let's define a mathematical program, but allow us to have what we call probabilistic constraints or chance constraints. So those are constraints in which we ask that the probability of something happening be, for example, larger than a given probability or smaller than a given probability. It all depends. And then there is robust optimization. And I think I'm going to just not get too much into robust optimization. It's just that it's an alternate way of dealing with uncertainty. It has grown tremendously in the last few years. And as I told you with my friends Munari and Morabito, in fact, we have two chapters, one on VRP, on stochastic VRP, and one on robust VRP. So there are lots of things to be said about this. And I don't have time for this today. Now, I would just like to take a little sidestep, which is more about, okay, we have some techniques, we have some definitions, but I want to emphasize what I call modeling paradigms. And this has to do about what is the way in which you look at the problem and the way in which you're going to address the problem. One of them is called real-life optimization. It's also called re-optimization. The idea here is that information is revealed over time. It's processed almost immediately, and solutions can be modified on the fly so that I'm having some kind of delivery plan or pickup plan, and I have vehicles that are following the routes, but after pretty much visiting each customer, we can question the plan. We can revisit the plan. And obviously those things rely on dynamic programming and Markov chains, Markov decision processes. There's been some very interesting work done in this area. And one of the consequences of the fact that solutions are being constantly revisited is the fact that really one doesn't have really a plan to follow. One is just reacting to information as it is received. And in a sense, routes are created piece by piece. And you can easily imagine that for lots of situations, this is not so practical. You know, in lots of practical situations, people like to have drivers that have routes that they know, they always operate the same route, and they just move on. So, obviously, the other alternate approach to this is so-called a priori optimization. So the idea in a priori optimization is that there's really a planning stage. Somebody is really planning routes for the company, and well, those routes have to stand the test of reality against the realization of stochastic parameters in a second step. So I have a plan, but then suddenly demands are much higher than was projected. What do we do? I have a plan, but we're making for a traveling repairman, and some repairs take much longer than planned. What do we do? So those things have to be addressed either by chance-constrained programming which requires robust optimization, and maybe some ad hoc approaches. But let's just think a little bit about chance-constrained programming. The idea in chance-constrained programming is that we're going to make a plan, and we want this plan to work most of the time. So we want to have some probability that the plan will work. For example, I want to make sure that the total demand assigned to each route in a solution will meet the capacity constraint. And if those demands, for example, would be independent and Poisson, I could even transform this into a deterministic problem. But in general, I cannot do that. So when this cannot be done, then there are pretty complex issues from an even numerical standpoint. One issue from a practical standpoint with those chance-constrained models is that if the plan works out 95% of the time, if you are in the 95% of the time where the plan works out nicely, you're good. What happens in the other 5%? We don't know. We don't know. That's left in the air. So imagine a plan if you're a student, you want to attend an exam, and you take a chance-constrained approach. So you're going to make it to the exam 95% of the time, and the other 5% of the time you're just going to fail miserably. So this is an approach that has to be dealt with, I would say, with some careful attention. Robust optimization, I told you that I don't want to get over this too much. I said that here I've written, this is an old slide, I've written that this is not used so much. No, it has been used a lot in recent years. And then we come to stochastic programming with recourse. Stochastic programming with recourse is kind of the natural way of framing a priori optimization in a mathematical model. Because we have the different stages that allow us to look at some kind of, where's my pointer? Looks like mine. At the bottom? No. It looks like it disappeared. Oh, no, it's there. Okay. So we have this a priori solution that we want to look at, and then we observe the stochastic parameters, and then we take recourse actions. And there are a bunch of solution methods to do this. Now, the one thing also about this general approach is that it's probably closer to what lots of industries are interested in doing. They're not interested in replanning on the fly all the time. They're not interested in not having solutions when there are stochastic parameters. So what they want is they want to be able to find good plans that can stand the reality of stochastic realizations. So let's look at VRP with stochastic demands. So I mentioned already, I think this is the most studied stochastic VRP. Basically, it's a variant of the well-known capacitated VRP in which demands are uncertain. I said earlier that normally demands are specified through probability distributions. This is called the support-based representation, but you have an alternate way of specifying this. You could have scenarios. So I could say that for this region for which I'm trying to develop a delivery plan, I have 40 possible demand scenarios and work with those scenarios. But I would say for the time being, we will mainly focus on this support-based representation. So, when we're using the a priori modeling paradigm, the idea is clearly that we want to build routes before trying to execute them, and that one of the problems that we have is that if we wanted to build solutions such that capacity restrictions will be fulfilled for all possible realizations, then we would have to be super conservative. Not super conservative, over conservative. Because then we look at this, what is this kind of worst case situation, which happens only very rarely, and try to deal with it. So basically the idea is to allow solutions in which we will not respect capacity constraints for all possible realizations of the demand. So the first stage is really we build solutions. And we thus, as I said before, we must allow routes where sometimes the capacity can be exceeded. And then if this capacity is exceeded, what should I be doing? Okay, I'm supposed to visit 8 customers, and the total demand of those, I have a truck of capacity 100, the total demand of those customers is 120. What do I do? Well, I could think of all kinds of things that can be done, but any of those course of action is what we call a recourse. It's one way of deciding how we're going to manage the fact that we cannot fulfill completely the demand of the customers. One thing which is important about recourse has to do also with when do we receive exact information about demands. This is really interesting because depending on really the planning environment in which you are, it may make sense or not. So there might be situations in which I have early information, which means that, for example, I will already know, let's say early in the morning before deliveries start, that the demand on this route is 120 instead of being 100. Maybe I can do something. Maybe I can put an additional truck. Maybe I can split the route over 2 trucks to be able to meet those requests. So that's one thing, and there are probably constraints on the way in which I can correct this routing plan. But knowing the information about the demands early is certainly useful. The other case is what we call late information. Late information is the case in which, as the truck is driving to a customer location, we realize how much demand there is at that location. And when this happens, then the one thing that can happen very often is that we have what we call a route failure. Customer wants 10 units and we have only 8 units on the truck. What do we do? And here I have a small subsidiary constraint question, which is, why isn't this model as a multi-stage stochastic problem? Because you could think, whenever I'm visiting a customer, this is a different stage in the problem. And in theory, you could do that. But multi-stage stochastic programming problems are very difficult to deal with, so that people are not very excited about casting a problem in this framework. And basically, the idea is, okay, I have a plan, and what I know is that at some point the plan may fail. And what do I do when it fails? Well, the classical answer to this is what is called classical recourse. So this was proposed back in 1989 by a group of people in Montreal, Michel Gendreau, Gilbert Laporte, and Pierre Trudeau. And their idea was that, well, why not have the vehicle go back to the depot, replenish capacity, and go back and continue the route. And this thing is called classical recourse because this has been one of the foundations of vehicle routing with stochastic demands for many years. So basically, this was the recourse scheme that people were considering, and a lot of the literatures, if you go back to the literature in the 90s and early 200s, it basically revolves around this modus operandi. We plan the routes, and then we execute them. If we fail, we go back to the depot, we replenish, and we continue. And this is the problem. Well, obviously, you may believe that this is not very bright. In fact, we became keenly aware of this in, I guess it must have been 2009. My then PhD student, Walter Ray, submitted a paper where he was using this classical recourse. And one of the referees just wrote, said, what is this nonsense? I mean, intelligent people would never do something like that. They said, well, the whole literature is built around this. But I must say that this was a big wake-up call that perhaps we could do better. Obviously, there had been some work by those guys, Yang, Matur, and Ballou, which had proposed a different policy, which they called optimal restocking. So the idea there is, as the vehicle is traveling along the route, well, one could try to decide if it would be a good idea to go and restock to the depot. Just go back to the depot now. You know, if you have just one unit left on the truck, and you know that the demand of the next guy is at least 5 units, you know that you're going to fail. Why should you fail deliberately when you could try to prevent it? So this whole idea of preventive restocking. But this was based on dynamic programming, and if you go back to those early papers on optimal restocking, is that the papers would allow you to find optimal restocking points when you knew the routes. So this idea that you wanted to optimize the whole thing, optimize the routes, and be able to optimize the restocking, we were not quite there at that point in time. Then there's been other ideas. For example, Ack and Herrera have suggested the idea of maybe pairing routes. So they would have vehicles that would operate in tandem, trying to pick up one vehicle, maybe trying to pick up the excess demand of the other. This was one option. And it's clear that when you sit down and start thinking about it, there are lots of ways that you can imagine recourse. And basically this, after the wake-up call that I just mentioned to you, Walter Ray and I started thinking, say, well, can we do some other recourse? What would be other possible recourse that we could handle? And this led to a pair of papers with PhD student Majid Salavati Goshkalb on different recourse policies. And I'm going to try to tell you rapidly about those. I'm trying to see how much time I have left. And so the idea is to have so-called fixed policies. Fixed policies are you just decide upon rules, and you give yourself the tools to be able to implement those rules. And basically, one thing that you discover as you try to develop those things is that basically this equates to setting thresholds for going back to the depot. So all basically those rules is just, if the stock left on the vehicle is below this value, then I should go back. So there's the basic one. But then some of them can just be based on the remaining demand and stock on the vehicle. Some of them can be based on assessment of risk. You can also look at the distance and derive mixed policies. So basically, demand-based policies, they just compute thresholds that are based on the residual capacity or the expected demand of the next vehicle, the expected demand of the customers on the remainder of the route. So any of those can work out. We can also compute some risk measure about failure. So we compute the probability of failure at the next customer. And if this is high, if we're almost sure we're going to fail at the next customer, might as well go back to the depot immediately. If the risk is low, well, no need to do so. And if we don't quite know, we can also look at the distance to the depot and compare the cost of a preventive restocking versus the expected cost of the remainder of the route. Okay, so all of this works and can be implemented. So you can optimize routes so that you implement those recourses. Then I told you that in the original papers on optimal restocking, there were no rules, there were no methods for constructing routes that would be optimal in this context. Well, this changed in the late 2010s. So there was first a paper by François Louveau and J.J. Salazar, where they produced an algorithm that could implement optimal restocking policies for, I would say, limited number of situations. And then we were able to propose a more general method. But basically, the whole idea here is that we can now optimize routes so that we implement optimal restocking, which is, to be quite honest, when we completed this paper, I was so happy, because for me this has been kind of the grail for many years. Are we able to find a way to optimize a routing plan such that it is compatible with optimal restocking policy? Okay, and basically when you look at this, is whenever you serve a customer, the vehicle can either experience a failure that can still happen, and then you go back to the depot as in the classical recourse. You could complete service and then do a preventive restocking trip, or you can just serve and proceed. And the decision that is made at each customer is based on the expected cost of those actions. And the expected cost of this is really built in the optimization of the routes. Now, some solution methods for vehicle routing with stochastic demands. There is, obviously, one can use meta-heuristics. And in fact, meta-heuristics are not difficult to implement. They're not much more difficult than, I would say, heuristics for standard vehicle routing problem, except that someone must be able to compute effectively the value of expected recourse. And there are specialized methods that have been developed for this. And I think I'm going to try to show you very quickly interesting about those methods. So the first thing I want to show you, this is the mathematical formulation, what we call the direct formulation, two-index formulation of VRP with stochastic demands. The formulation of the problem is basically identical, almost identical to a deterministic problem, except for two things. And those things are here is the expected recourse function. So the objective function as the basic cost of the routes plus the course of the recourse action. And here is a subtree elimination route, which is based on the fact that we want routes to serve, we want that the expected demand on a route be no larger than the capacity of the vehicle. And this is the rule that was added for convenience and that has been questioned since, but it's something that's present in many papers. And basically what you do is I'm going to skip all of this material because it's quite technical. But just let me tell you one thing is that a large fraction of the difficulty about implementing those methods has to do with the fact that we must find lower bounds for partial solutions. If we have solutions where we have solutions in which we have some integer variables, some non-integer variables, and things like that, and we're looking at those solutions is, can we find some good lower bound on those solutions? And this is a topic of intense research for many years. Okay. Now, I just want to show you a little bit a totally different approach, which is an approach based on branch and price and column generation. So this is the column generation version for VRP with stochastic customers. And so this is the formulation. The formulation has basically a set partitioning formulation, and which is typical of branch and price approaches. And here we have the subproblem that we need to solve. And this subproblem is extremely similar to the problem that we have in deterministic problems, except again for the recourse term, which changes lots of things. And here again, we have the same thing as before. We can compute an expected failure course for a route. This is fairly easy. But the problem is, how can we integrate this into how can we integrate this into a branch and price algorithm? So the way to integrate this into a branch and price algorithm, okay, this is the slide that I want to show you. So the way to do this is, normally when you do branch and price, you do column generation, you work on a copy of the customer graph, and you're looking at finding paths on this graph. Here, the problem is that what is important is not only where you are, but also what are the expected demand and the expected variance that you have when you are visiting a node. And the whole idea of the method is to really exploit this graph to be able to find effectively good routes. And I'm going to skip all of this. And just want to tell you a little bit about some recent work. Very recently, 5 years ago, this fellow, Alexandre Florio, finished a very interesting PhD dissertation in the University of Vienna. And he developed a new algorithm for routing with stochastic demands. And one thing that he did in that problem is that he revisited many assumptions. many assumptions about the formulation of the problem, which led to consequences on the solution algorithm. And so he did this in that paper, and then he extended this, and I happen to be a co-author there, but I must say that the guy who is the real clever guy in this is Florio. And he managed to integrate in a solution method some Bayesian learning for problems with correlated demands. And in my opinion, this is a huge breakthrough, being able to deal with correlated demands. The way correlated demands are handled in this paper is a bit simplistic. It's assumed that correlated demands of all customers depend on one stochastic, one random variable. And basically, what is the challenge here is to try to find out what is the expected value of this random variable. Some other people also have been really trying on improving the type of method based on direct formulation. So, paper by Hugendorn and Split last year, and very recently, I must say, Lucas Parada is one of my PhD students, developed a very interesting method which relies on special properties of the recourse function, and the way to express the recourse function is a lot more efficient than in previous papers. So if you look at one of the problems of direct formulation has always been trying to solve problem with large number of routes. So those are methods that we're doing quite well. So those are new results. So especially routes that are long, if you look at here, routes that are long are a challenge. And here, we're able to do quite well. Now, problem with stochastic customers, I will just give you a flavor of what the problem is all about and what it can be used for. Those are problems in which customers, there's just a probability that each customer is actually present. And the reason why I want to talk about this problem is that this is a problem that can be used to model vehicle routing problem with consistent customers. So back in the late 2000, Groer, Golden, and Wassil proposed a model to try to have this idea that many companies like to have the same customers visited by the same drivers every day. And basically, the way they propose a problem is, let's say that we have deep periods with known demand and a number of vehicles, and we want to plan routes such that, for example, the arrival time variation to the customers is no more than a given value. How can we do that? Well, we want to minimize total travel time, so basically we build different routes for every day. Okay, this is interesting if you know basically what are the customers that you have to visit every day over the planning horizon. But what about situation where basically what you want to have, did I skip? What about situations where basically we want to have the same driver visit the same customers every day? We're going to have some kind of delivery time window for the customers, and we will just assume that we don't know which customers will call on a given day. So this is the typical situation of, for example, lots of those FedEx and DHLs of the world, they service mainly commercial customers. And they are businesses where the FedEx guy goes every day or almost every day. And those companies, they like to have consistency. So how can we try to implement consistency here on the basis of the fact that customers will or will not show up? And we do this by modeling the problem as a problem with stochastic customers and self. It's a bit complicated because we have also another problem where we have to set up time windows for all the routes. So time is flying. Time has flown, so let's go to conclusions. So just to tell you that stochastic vehicle routing is a rich and, in my opinion, very promising area. I think there's a lot of work that remains to do in the area of recourse. Is what are the things that you want to do when things fail? I said up to now, very little time work on problem with stochastic travel time and services. There are some papers, and also I showed you one paper that deals with correlation, but that's one paper. There's very little on correlation. And I just added a bunch of recent papers, which I like for different reasons. The first paper up there is a paper in which we have, it's a problem with stochastic demands, but there are time windows. So whenever you return to the depot to replenish and things like this has an impact on your routes. This problem that I told you about earlier with those stochastic two-dimensional items, some interesting chance constraint model, and here a problem with hard time windows and stochastic service time. So it is possible to tackle those problems, but it's quite complicated. And I'm going to stop here.
Take 2-3 questions.
Thank you, Michel. It's a really interesting tool.
Just if you get us to pass the mic. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Michel. That was really interesting. I'm just conscious that drivers have a limit on the amount of time that they can drive. So is that taken into account in a conservative way to assume that there will be some return to depot?
Well,
or is it with the time window?
So this is a bit the idea of the paper with De La Vega, because there's been also people who have looked at problems and and we're concerned about, there's a paper on this also about this issue that when you have to return to the depot, it's, well, you may exceed the route duration, you know, if the drive, and something which is interesting and which has a bit to do with when I showed you the mixed policy, The mixed policy is a policy in which you not only look at the risk of failure, but you also look at the distance at which you are from the depot. Because the issue is not just failing. The issue is where you fail. And in fact, in the direct formulations that we have, when we're looking at undirected version, we look at the possibility of traveling routes in both directions because it's the same basic cost, but the cost of failure, expected cost of failure is not the same.
Thank you. Yeah, helpful.
And just to go back on this general idea, the reason why I'm saying there's still a lot of work to do on recourse is to deal with issues like that.
Hello? Can you hear me? Yeah. I just was wondering if you can comment on the software that's developed to solve these kinds of problems and how sometimes it's hard to reproduce papers, results, and things like that, and sharing this sort of thing.
If you're looking at a lot of those papers, basically what you have are kind of homemade codes. They are kind of implementations of when you look at integer L-shape. Integer L-shape is it's Bender's decomposition with additional frills, and lots of the parts of the codes are not exactly user-friendly. It's and it goes to a point that it can be quite difficult to reproduce one's own results. It's no, this is greasy work. It's kind of dirty.
Thank you very much, Michel, for a very interesting talk. In your problem, in the problems that you considered, you want to serve all the customers. Can you consider problems in which you have to select whom to serve?
Well, it has a lot to do with, okay, I want to go back to my general remark about the fact that the VRP is just tons of different problems that are just happen to share the same mathematical structure. Those things about what are the decisions that you do, deciding whether you're going to serve or not serve a customer, is in fact, I did not tell you about a project that we did a few years ago, where the recourse was really totally different. And in that project, what we would do is we would never go back to the depot. We would just drop the customers. So you drop the customers, and later on, another truck will go and take care of the drop customers. You can see this like I do morning deliveries, and whoever I'm not able to deliver in the morning, I'll send an express truck in the afternoon. But as I'm saying again, this is an area where this whole idea of recourse is, for me, it's kind of it's a gold mine where we're just on the top level. You know, we just have to keep on trying to develop recourse that would be meaningful in some context. I think I did not say what happens in the problem in the Cote paper. In the Cote paper here, what happens is we're trying to pack those objects in a truck. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. They won't put it on the truck if it doesn't fit. So the item stays on the dock and will be delivered tomorrow. So totally different type of recourse. It's just that when you are planning the thing, anything that doesn't fit gets put back to tomorrow with a penalty.
But is it just based on the capacity, available capacity?
This-
Or would you also consider, okay, I can serve this customer because it's close to, it is on my route
in
anyway.
that case, the decisions about which items would be left to be served tomorrow is that there would be a penalty associated with each object. You compute a penalty that you associate with each object, and you decide this object I will not deliver. And if you have to leave something that would be at the end of the route and you leave it, well, tomorrow the penalty will be more expensive.
Last question.
Hello. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's like really insightful. I'd like just to share some like ideas. Like I've published a paper in vehicle routing problem, and I think there is still some like additional work. So maybe others like can like make use of that. So the idea was like we involved a human factor like while we, like in the model. So we studied the effect of the driver's behavior on the optimal plan. And so I think that was not like, we didn't consider like stochastic demand, so that might be like still more work to do. And also the other idea is to involve like ride sharing. So we didn't like to deal with the stochasticity of traffic, for example. So we allowed the drivers to try like different routes. So by assigning like like a level of autonomy for the drivers to make like timely decisions whenever there are some unexpected circumstances while they're in the route. And we found that like the optimal plan has not been affected like in a bad way according to the sensitivity analysis results. So I wanted just to share my like thoughts about this. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those suggestions. As I said, I mean, the realm of thing is the world, the universe of vehicle routing is very large, and when you're looking at the stochastic part, it is it's also very large because stochastic VRP is in all situations much more complex than the deterministic variance. Because you have to figure out what are you going to do whatever happens. And this makes it so much more difficult.
Yeah.
Thank you.